Hey guys, today we're going over upgraded 6.0 Powerstroke intercooler. Let's compare it to OEM, go over some of the upgrades, but before we do that, let's talk about how intercoolers work. It might seem obvious to some, maybe not so obvious to others, but your intercooler is to cool down your charge air. So like on your 6.0 Powerstroke or any intercooled vehicle, the turbo is going to make a lot of hot air. The air coming out of the turbo could be upwards of 200, 300, even 400 degrees because your turbo is a compressor. Whenever you compress air, it gets hot. Well, all that hot air comes out, and as we know, cooler, denser air is going to make more power.
More power, baby.
That's where your intercooler comes in. So as this orients on the truck, the turbo would be up top. The hot air comes out and goes in one side, and it comes in extremely hot. And then whether it's your fan sucking air through or driving down the air, blowing air through, it starts off real hot, and by the time it gets to the other side, it's cooled down, and then it gets sent right back into the motor. That cooler air is denser, it's gonna make more power, and it actually is safer for your truck. So why would you upgrade your intercooler? What's wrong with the OEM? Well, the OEM unit is actually pretty good. I mean, they hold up pretty well, but they do have a few downsides. One of the biggest downside is gonna be the end tanks. They have crimped on plastic end tanks, which are held together with an O-ring, and over time or higher boost, they do tend to leak. Some of that's from the higher boost, some of it's because it actually kind of like shifts and twists a little bit in the frame as you're going, depending on how good your cab mounts are. What that looks like is typically oil residue. You often has a little bit of oil going through your CCV system, or your turbo might be spitting just a little bit of oil and it ends up in the system. Doesn't really hurt anything, but it does start to identify where you have a leak, and this intercooler was leaking right here, spitting a little bit of oil, the dirt gets on it, and now you can see it. This was a very small leak, but I boost leak checked these where it's leaking all the way around, little bubbles flowing all the way around, and at first that barely hurts performance, but I have seen these end tanks literally blow off. So one of the first things we upgrade are the end tanks. So it's solid metal from edge to edge, and it is welded instead of crimped. That eliminates any issues of it leaking on the end tanks or blowing apart as the OEM intercoolers can do. The other thing you start doing is upgrading the performance of it. This intercooler is thicker. Let's go ahead and measure it real quick. The factory intercooler is coming in just under 2.5, maybe 2 3/8. We've got a 3-inch solid core. So the first thing is the core is larger. A larger core is going to dissipate heat better. It's going to have more surface area for the cool air to flow over the hot air, or flow over the hot intercooler and cool the air down. The next big upgrade is this is a bar and plate design over the factory tube and fin. Well, what does that mean? Let's cut to a picture of what a tube and fin looks like versus a bar and plate design. As you can see, the tubes actually stick out past the end, and it obstructs airflow a little bit as air is flowing into it. The tube and fin is easier to mass produce, it's cheaper, it's lighter, but it is less efficient. So when you get to a bar and plate, when you look at the edge of the bar and plate design, it is smooth where the air flows in, which provides much smoother flow. It also is more efficient, there's more surface area, it cools better, but it is much heavier. One thing you may notice with the bar and plate design that's thicker and more efficient is that it can increase your coolant temps just a few degrees. Typically, it's only while idling, low airflow conditions. Once your fan kicks on or you got 65 miles an hour with the air blowing through here, it won't even matter. But because it is thicker, it is releasing more heat. It is sending that into the radiator behind it. So while you're idling or sitting there to stop or really low speed, you might see like a 2 to 3 degree increase in your radiator temperatures. Another upgrade with the weld-on end tanks is they are larger, they flow better, and the flow path itself on the inside is better on the bar and plate design versus the tube and fin. The other issue you run into with higher horsepower builds, at a certain point, you're going to push too much boost to these intercoolers. I've seen a few guys that run large turbos, compounds, and they said they didn't have problems with these end tanks, but more often than not, you will literally blow the end tanks off the intercooler. We've tested these intercoolers up to 120 PSI with no problems. You're going to be blowing boosts and blowing other stuff apart well before you blow this intercooler apart. So what we're going to do today is we are going to swap out a truck that has a factory intercooler, KC Stage 1 turbo, and just a tune. That's it. The bigger you go, the more advantageous an intercooler is going to be. But even stock trucks with stock turbos or even just a small turbo upgrade will see huge benefits. So let's go ahead and test these on the dyno. All right, we just got done swapping the intercooler and running the dynos, and we ran it in a couple of different ways to try to get you guys the best information possible. First of all, let's look at the dyno graph. Red is with the upgraded KC turbo intercooler, gray is with the factory. So you can see that we gained upwards of 11 horsepower. Basically, all throughout the RPM band, from 2,500 RPMs all the way to redline. You had a nice 10 to 15 horsepower gain. There were also some torque gains because the intercooler does flow a little bit better and a little bit smoother and keeps the air cooler down low. So not only did we dyno it, we also data logged it. And let's go over the data that we see. We're going to focus on just right here at the end of the data log, end of the dyno run, and see what it looks like. We'll compare OEM versus KC. So we've got KC on the right, OEM on the left. It's hard to get the exact same RPM because of the data refresh rate on this program, but close enough to the exact same spot, exact same mile per hour on the dyno. Let's go over what we're seeing. IAT1 is where the air is going into the air filter, or it's pre-turbo, pre-intercooler. IAT2 is in the intake manifold, so that's going to be after the intercooler. And then we got RPMs and boost. These are all the things that you want to look at when you're looking at the intercooler and its efficiency. So it's about 68 degrees out. So why isn't this reading 68 degrees? Because there's a lot of heat soak from the engine, everything's hot, and it is sucking a little bit of the hot air from the intercooler and the radiator into it. The IAT2 is the one you want to focus on the most, the intake air temperature, or the second intake air temperature, which is in the intake manifold. As you can see on the KC intercooler, only got up to 119. On the factory, it was all the way up to 125, which I call the red zone. You want the coolest air possible. It's not always going to happen, but the hotter the air, the less dense it is. The hotter the air, the less horsepower you're going to make. It's going to heat up your engine quicker. It's going to be harder to tow with. And this is just a dyno run, so this was a very, very quick run. Simulated like just going from 0 to 60 miles an hour real quick. You can also see we had 2 pounds of boost more at a little bit less load, close enough in load to say it's the same thing, but you had 2 pounds of boost more, cooler air, which results in more horsepower. So in the dyno, that's going to equate to about 10 to 15 horsepower. But we also did another super interesting test, is that we simulated towing on the dyno. All right, so this is one of the biggest advantages of an upgraded intercooler that no one ever talks about. Yeah, dyno runs, track runs, you're not really getting the intercooler that hot when you're doing that. But when you are simulating towing down the freeway or towing up a hill or high boost for long periods of time, you get what's called heat soak. I actually have a video that I want to show real quick. And if you look at this video, we're going to speed it up a little bit because this is a 1 minute long run on the dyno. But as you can see on the intercooler, the hot air starts traveling across the intercooler. What that is hot air coming in one side, air blowing through the intercooler trying to keep it cool, and then cool air is supposed to be flowing down the other side. But if your intercooler is not big enough or you're running too much boost, you will get heat soak all the way across the intercooler, and it results in really high intake air temperature. So now that you've seen that video and realize what that looks like in real life, let's go ahead and cut to the data log. So as you see on the data log, this was 1 minute into the run, same load, same speed, almost the same boost. I couldn't keep it exactly the same, but we try to keep these as close as possible. 1 minute into the run, the KC Turbo's intercooler was 106 in the intake manifold, while the OEM was already up to 130 because it was totally heat soaked. And when you go to the intake air temperature, KC's still sucking fairly cool air at 84 degrees. OEM intercooler all the way up to 112. That intercooler is so hot that the truck is starting to suck hot air from in front of the truck near the intercooler into the intake, which exaggerates everything. It's really hard to measure the horsepower difference between these two, because to maintain the same speed with the same load on the dyno, it's going to be the same horsepower. Now, people are going to say we don't have enough airflow going through there, which is true, but also typically there's a trans cooler in front of this. There's the power steering cooler up here. You've got a grill and a bumper really restricting it. So in reality, this is getting a decent amount of airflow, even though you don't have 65 miles an hour worth of air blowing on there. But sometimes you're towing at 30 miles an hour and it's hardly getting any airflow. So here we are, right at the end of the run. It's totally heat soaked. You got 350 degree air on one side and 230 right in the center. You're probably talking like 160 to 180 degrees, which is what's getting into your engine, well over the 125 and below that we'd like to see. So this is what you're trying to avoid. With an OEM, it's going to be worse, especially high boost, high load, up a mountain, long periods of time, 110 degrees outside. You're going to need as much intercooler as you can get. Here's what the intercooler looked like during the towing test at the exact same point, 1 minute into the video. So 1 minute after high boost, high load, towing up a hill situation. You got the OE on the left, you got the KC on the right. You can see the max temp on the KC was 243 on the inlet, about 153 at the center of the core, and then you can see how blue it still is over here. When you go over to the OE, you've got a max of 292. The center of it's 192, and you can see all the blue is gone. So that's why this is sucking in hotter air, and 2 is it's not able to keep it as cool. While the KC Intercooler is keeping everything cooler, it's more efficient. You still have that bright hot spot because it's still getting the same temp of air coming in, but it's able to cool down quicker and more efficiently. That results in more power, better towing, cooler EGTs, lower intake air temperature, better fuel mileage, all around good. There's no downsides to an upgraded intercooler except for the cost and maybe the little extra weight. There you guys have it, a full review of the KC Turbo's upgraded intercooler for the 6.0 Powerstroke, which is able to give you cooler intake air temperature, more power, better towing ability, drops right into factory, and you get the durability of the weld-on end tanks versus the plastic end tanks. If you like this hoodie, make sure to check it out in our apparel section. Everybody loves the Turbo Snail. If you've got any questions, make sure to post them up below. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy this content.